Hey guys, Jarretman here, back where we left off from the last video if you watched that one. Just getting into the 500 zoom again. Going to do maybe an hour, maybe slightly less. Nines, we're going to do both here on table one. Both being 3-bet sometimes and call sometimes. Again, the pool is pretty tough right now. Not the best pool I've ever played in, that's for sure. I'm not going to always 3-bet the king jack off, but we will 3-bet it some of the time here. It's one of those borderline hands, small blind versus button. I've seen charts that never 3-bet it, actually, and I've seen charts that always 3-bet it. Table 2 seems like a nice board to have a lot of checks. This hand seems like a nice hand to check raise or potentially check call. Okay, we get a 15. I do want to place some bets on this board, I think. I do think we want to have a betting range. And now on the 2, we have another interesting choice between betting and checking. Okay, we get an 18. We'll go for the check. And I think we're going to always check raise this hand now on the 2. I think we're going to end up going for the triple check raise here. If he does have a king, if he has a hand that is going to call us versus a big bet, he's going to be betting himself mostly. The hands we could target with a bet would be like ace high type hands. We could check raise some of the time here with the 6-7. The added benefit of going for the check on the river there too is, of course, that you get some value from his bluffs, from his air. I find it relatively hard to believe he checked back a 9 twice on the flop in the turn, especially so quickly. So it's not like and even on the river, I think he's going to mostly bet a 9 if we check to him. So really the only hands we're targeting are, like I said, the ace high region. Okay, we roll a call on table 1, which is kind of fun. Calling with trips on the low trips board, big blind versus hijack. Definitely a board where we have a severe trips advantage. He doesn't open much 6x suited at all, and we call a decent amount of 6x suited. But we include some traps into our check calling range. Because again, actually, I shouldn't say again because I was talking about that in the last video, but he has the medium equity advantage. He has the overpair advantage. He has the good high card advantage. Okay, we'll go for the check raise on the river. Roll to 21. That's a little annoying. He has a hand that potentially would have called us versus a small bet on the river at least. I think it's not too crazy to assume that he can find some checkbacks on the turn with a hand like 8s through 5s and then find a value bet on the river. Not to mention some overpairs, some 9x. And then, of course, his bluffs. We're a little bit shorter here on table 2, shorter effective with the original opener, so I was going to 3-bet to a bit of a smaller size. But we faced the 3-bet ISO here, and we'll go for the cold 4-bet instead. Don't want to go too big, don't want to go that small either, though. In general, cold 4-bets, even when from out of position, we're going to go to a bit of a smaller size. I think 23 is a Yeah, I think this is a fine size. This is the size I normally use. I was just thinking about if it makes sense to go smaller with the under the gun player in there. And of course, stacking off here on table 2. Not the greatest spot in the world to stack off, despite the fact we have kings, if I'm honest. Because the main hand that he's going to be jamming that we are ahead of is ace-king, and we block that. He's not going to be jamming queens. He's not going to be jamming jacks. So we're either behind the aces or we're ahead to ace-king or chopping with kings. But of course, we're not folding. Just kidding. I was just kidding. He can have ace-queen off, I guess. It seems a little loose. He must think I'm getting out of line here, as he is isolating a weaker player's open from under the gun. So his range might be wider than it's supposed to be, and maybe he assumes that therefore I am cold 4-betting wider than I'm supposed to be here, so ace queen off becomes a profitable jam. And that might be true, might not be true. It's hard to say, really. Table 2, this spot really sucks, man. It sucks being deep with the button left to act behind. It would be a great spot if the button wasn't in the pot, and we could play deep heads up with pocket 8s here. I have no good reason as to why I'm betting small here, except for I'm just targeting his ace high and king high region. So this bet is very effective when it targets that region. If I wanted to choose a one-size strategy, I think I want to go a bit bigger. There's hands that have more reason to bet bigger than there is hands that have reason to bet smaller, if that makes sense. Giving up this river seems really nitty. That doesn't feel good. This hand's not a pure open, but we have this one player in the small blind. And it's a mix open anyways. If he didn't open so big, I wouldn't mind calling this sometime with the big blind, but versus that size, I'm not going to play any calls. Table 2, we're going to play a call or a 4-bet. I think ace queen off is kind of close already. Hijack versus small blind. Between folding even. I think this is a nice board to bet small with our range on table 1. However, I think the preferred strategy here involves some bigger bets. Bonk always just puts my hands into the spot where it doesn't know what to do. I know some of it's how I'm running, but it's just always like it's the exact size I don't want to face with the exact holding that I have. I'm already like bottom of range pre-flop when I call the 3-bet. Even deeper, we'll mix in some 3-bets with the 10s. However, it's less fun, that's for sure. It's so tempting to float here, but I think the ranges are tight enough and that size is big enough that when we don't have a diamond, we can fold. Like I said, it's the bottom of our offsuit ace-x. We don't have ace-jack off. I don't even think we're necessarily supposed to have ace-queen off pure. Depends on the ranges, I suppose. 10s is close without a club, but versus 1/3, I think we still have to peel even deep. 2 hands in a row, just facing the sides we don't want to face. I don't think there's enough value or realization. I guess realization isn't the right word. I don't think there's enough value in calling here in order to try to get paid sometimes on rivers. And our hand, it has low equity even when it is ahead, which is a really bad attribute for your hand to have. At least when you call with a king here, your hand has relatively high equity, or at least higher equity than pocket 10s when you are ahead. Not to mention that a king is just ahead of some of those mergy bets you might see on the turn, like ace-jack with the ace of clubs. We'll do some 3-bets, we'll do some calling with the 9-4 suited. We get a 3-bet this time. Easy fold versus the 4-bet. I've always wondered what the threshold is for how small someone 4-bets in this spot to at what point we just stop folding these suited hands. Because a lot of our range ends up being these suited junky hands like Jack 6 suited down to Jack 2 suited, 9-3 suited, 9-4 suited, all mixed in there. And I would think that the junkier offsuit combos like King 7 off, or I don't know, Jack 7 off, 9-7 off, those hands are always going to fold versus even if a min 4-bet. But I think versus a min 4-bet, these suited hands would call. And I wonder where the threshold lies. Like, at what point do these hands have to mix? Because that would be an interesting size to start 4-betting too, wouldn't it? I was kind of zoned out, and I just bet this flop without thinking about it. I was talking about this hand. Seven four suited is already basically not an open. If you were to open the 7-4 suited, it's absolute bottom of your opening range there. If anyone knows, by the way, about that blind versus blind sizing question that I had, and you are willing to answer it, go ahead and do that. I'd be very interested. So to barrel the turn here, we have a lot of air that is able to barrel the turn, not necessarily just straight draws and flush draws. But of the air that we do have, I think we don't want to have spades. We're blocking the 3 of spades isn't as bad, but the ace of spades seems like a pretty bad card to have. We're blocking his folds on the turn, blocking his floats. We're also just straight up blocking his ace highs that would check call the flop too, like ace of spades, 7 of clubs, ace of spades, 8 of clubs. Roll a 3, we'll give up and lose here. I don't think we ever win, but that's fine. Rolling a lot of low numbers today. What's going on with this random number generator? That's not fun. Do something a little cheeky here on table 1. I think it's tough to play against. Not to mention it's the size that our exact hand wants to bet. You know, if you're playing with someone a lot and you have big samples and they notice that you're mixing too much in the turn here, it might be tough, but that'll take a while, I guess. And versus those people, I'm not going to take this strategy. Like if you put too many good hands into your big betting range on the turn, then your small betting range ends up being capped, and like now we're top of range. And versus that strategy, you just want to, I guess, jam the river with every single hand. But that's not the strategy I'm going to play. It's not crazy hard to just include queen 10, you know, into that small bet range some of the time. It's really not that hard. Lex playing the 80 big blind stack. Okay, we'll size down our 3-bet a little bit. The reason you don't see a lot of short stacking, I guess professionals you would call them, in the 500 Zoom pool is, first of all, you can only short stack to 50 big blinds. And second of all, the rake is so high and the weaker players often play deeper in Zoom that it doesn't make that much sense to play short stacking here. However, I do feel like, even myself included, there's a lot of people who don't know how to play versus short stacks, especially pre-flop. Which is interesting of itself, as pre-flop tends to be the thing people play the best nowadays. So yeah, I guess my point was that even if you do gain some edge versus some regs who don't necessarily know how to play short, the edge you gain doesn't justify how much you lose. We roll the interesting check back with the 8, the super low frequency check back, which I think is a thing at very low frequency. Obviously, we're mostly betting. I'm talking like maybe 5% frequency here, checking back an 8. And we will bet 3-bet on table 1. Bet 3-bet the side. He has to call us with some king highs and stuff here. The thinnest that we'll bet. Ooh, yeah, I don't know. King queen maybe? Is that way too thin? Yeah, looks fine from him. Gonna 3-bet some of the, or sorry, 4-bet some of the time with the ace-10 suited here. Okay, we get the 4-bet. Play a deep pot. Should be fun. Gonna play a simple 1/3 with range strategy here on table 2. I don't think I said it this video, but in general, I'm just going to try to play as simple as possible in these videos. Now on the turn, we want to mostly bet, sometimes check. We don't care that it's a 2. He really doesn't have that much 2x. Even ace-2 suited is not a big portion of his range, I would say. It's only 2 combos to begin with, but he might not even have that. Table 1 is not as bad as you would think, as neither of us really have 9x, so it's more just like a blank board that has a flush draw, which kind of favors the under-the-gun player. The thing that sucks for the under-the-gun player is there's no Broadway card out there. That's about it. And we're going to check on both tables now. And hate life on table 2 and love life on table 1. We could go for the small bet on table 2 as well, but I think it's just easier to check. Yeah, definitely we could go for the small bet here. It's getting a little thin on the 7 of hearts river though, but probably pure checking is a theory EV mistake with this hand, but kind of interesting decision here on table 1. We don't block king, queen of spades. I think there's slightly more value in bluff catching here than there is in jamming. That's actually a really bad river. Doesn't matter, we're still check calling. He has queens for sure. I think he can definitely have queens with the queen of spades and bet the turn. It's not that crazy. He has jacks, he has queens, he has 9s for hands that beat us. 6s is like super low frequency. I'm not even going to count that as too much of his range. He could have it though. And then he has lots of bluff candidates, and we just have to call the nut flush. He has king, queen of spades still, so. Yep. I don't know about his... I mean, Ishtar did it. It's probably fine. I'm going for a slightly larger bet here. The other option at this SPR is to obviously bet way smaller or even check, but I think people do this a lot versus this bet. I don't know what else to say. Because they don't want to call. They don't want to fold versus that size. Whereas if it's very small, they're like, okay, we can call. But when they do have a mid pair versus that size, they just kind of... They don't want to do the other two, so they do the other one. Might be the worst poker logic I've ever said, but I think it's true, actually. Like, if aces and kings are some of the hands that I have to mix folds with on the river, I don't know if you want ace king of spades or ace king of hearts here. Don't you just want like 8s with the spade, 7s with the spade, 10s with the spade? Can't you just bluff those hands? I don't know, man. I don't know this spot. I don't know what I'm doing. Ishtar probably knows better than I do. Seems a little out of line, but maybe he thinks that I'm not check. Maybe he thinks I'm not check calling enough traps or hands that have easy calls on the river, so that when I do have a hand like aces, kings, that has to call sometimes, fold sometimes, I end up in the always fold category. But if that's true, then you don't want ace king, do you? Anyways, that's it for this video, guys. I actually have to leave, so take care.